Vince Lombardi's 1963 Green Bay Packers were a well-oiled, bone-crushing machine, accustomed to mercilessly grinding their NFL opponents into the turf. But tonight, Lombardi's team is fighting for their lives against Ron Vander Kellen, a 185-pound, undrafted college kid. So why are the defending NFL champions playing a bunch of college seniors when they have everything to lose and nothing to gain? That's the question the NFL owners asked when Arch Ward first proposed the idea in 1934. But Arch Ward wasn't a football coach, a player, or a league executive. He was a sports editor for the Chicago Tribune. And while the modern fan might scoff at his seemingly controversial suggestion, he was, in actuality, throwing the burgeoning league a lifeline. That's because back then, college football was the premier footballing event in America. With its massive concrete stadiums, brass bands, rapid alumni bases, and larger-than-life athletes, the collegiate game held all the glory and the cash. Pro games, by contrast, were typically played in the dusty outfields of baseball stadiums on off days. Small market franchises folded constantly. Even titans like the Chicago Bears and Green Bay Packers were obsessing over their ledgers, trying to figure out how to keep the lights on and pay their players a wage to justify their continued commitment. The pro game was viewed by the public as a slower, uglier, and less respectable offshoot of the pure college sport. So the NFL desperately needed a grand stage to prove its worth, and Arch Ward was prepared to give it. Sitting in the dim newsroom, wielding a typewriter, Ward utilized the massive circulation of the Tribune like a blunt force weapon. He had already invented the Major League Baseball All-Star Game, understanding before anyone else that the American public craved cross-league, high-stakes exhibitions. Now, in the dead center of the Great Depression, he proposed a football equivalent to benefit Chicago area charities. However, despite all of the proposed benefits, many owners saw playing a squad of recently graduated seniors as a massive, unnecessary gamble. If the pros lost, they would validate every critic who dismissed the NFL as an inferior, gritty imitation. But Ward had a crucial ally on the inside, Chicago Bears owner George Halas. As the reigning NFL champions, Halas's Bears would be the team tasked with playing in the inaugural matchup. Far from being strong-armed, the visionary Halas recognized the golden opportunity. It was the ultimate calculated risk. Step onto the national stage and risk ultimate embarrassment, or stay in the shadows forever. The NFL desperately needed an audience, and Ward was offering the unparalleled promotional engine of the Tribune, a crowd of 80,000 at Soldier Field, and the unassailable PR of raising money for charity during the depths of the Great Depression. For a league starved for respect, it was an offer they couldn't refuse, but the Bears still had to put on a show. The first matchup was set for August 1934. You'd assume the Chicago Bears, as defending NFL champions, would be heavily favored. After all, this wasn't just any Bears team. This was a roster featuring terrifying, bone-crushing bruisers like Bronco Nagurski, men who looked like they were carved out of granite and fought in the trenches for a living. But by the time they cut the lights at Soldier Field, 79,432 fans in attendance had witnessed something the modern-day fan would have never expected. In the 1930s, the physical gap between a 22-year-old college senior and a 26-year-old professional was virtually non-existent. The college players were just as tough, just as fast, and completely unafraid of the pros. For 60 grueling minutes, the collegiate all-stars dug their cleats into the dirt and met the Bears head-on. The college defense swarmed Nagurski, dragging the mammoth fullback into the mud over and over again. And when the final whistle blew, the scoreboard read 0-0. It wasn't a loss, but for the NFL, it was a profound embarrassment. The mighty pros couldn't even score a single point against unpaid amateurs. Yet, paradoxically, the event was a massive financial and promotional success. It injected desperate cash and incredible visibility into the struggling professional league. Although the pros didn't win, the NFL did. But as the years ticked by and the popularity of the NFL increased, the once life-saving game started to become more and more of a liability for the primetime league, and it started to make more sense to cut it from the schedule entirely. The problem was, the game had become too profitable for the charities, and for the Tribune, to ever let it die. Plus, it had become an annual August tradition that the public had come to expect every year. But by the 1960s, the landscape had violently shifted. Under the ambitious new commissioner, Pete Rozelle, the NFL had discovered the goldmine of television. The players were no longer athletic hobbyists playing after their day jobs. They were highly paid, specialized professionals, boasting sizes and speeds that the human body had rarely achieved before. And no one represented this terrifying new era better than Vince Lombardi. Lombardi was the architect of the Green Bay Packers dynasty. He ran a punishing, militaristic training camp. Every minute of his preseason was obsessively accounted for in his relentless pursuit of Super Bowl rings. For Lombardi, halting his meticulously planned schedule to play a bunch of college kids was beyond infuriating. Not to mention, the injury risk was astronomical. If his franchise linebacker blew out his knee tackling a 21-year-old rookie, the Packers' season was over before it began. And Lombardi couldn't just play his B squad. The terms of the game demanded the reigning champions field their stars. Lombardi hated the game, but more than anything, he hated the idea of losing it. Enter Ron Vander Kellen. It was August 1963. Vander Kellen was 23 years old, a lean, lanky, 6'1", 185-pound quarterback. As the MVP of the 1963 Rose Bowl, he was a highly sought-after prospect, sparking a fierce bidding war between the rival AFL and the NFL's Minnesota Vikings, who eventually signed him. Yet, despite his collegiate accolades, stepping onto the field against the reigning NFL champions was a different reality entirely. Compared to the seasoned pros, he still looked like a leaf on the wind, seemingly too small, too fragile to survive the professional trenches. The moment first appeared to get to him too, as he fumbled his first snap of the game. He was staring down a Green Bay defense that featured 240-pound killers like Willie Davis, who seemed eager to snap him in half. Beyond the physical dominance of the pro players, the mythos of the Green Bay Packers franchise was at an all-time high. Football historians widely consider this 1962 team to be one of the greatest, most terrifyingly dominant football teams ever assembled in the pre-Super Bowl era. In 1962, they went 13-1, outscored opponents 415 to 148, secured back-to-back championships, and boasted a roster packed with future Hall of Famers. Beating Lombardi's peak dynasty was unthinkable for an NFL team, and especially for a team of hastily assembled amateurs. But the college All-Stars had a secret weapon: their head coach, NFL legend Otto Graham. As the Hall of Fame quarterback who led the Cleveland Browns to an unprecedented 10 consecutive conference championship games, winning 7 of them, Graham possessed one of the most ruthless and innovative offensive minds in sports history. He had spent a decade dismantling professional defenses, and he wasn't about to let Lombardi intimidate him. Graham looked at the massive Green Bay defensive line and realized exactly how to beat them. He couldn't outmuscle Lombardi, so he decided to weaponize the environment. It was August in Chicago. The heat and humidity were suffocating. Graham installed a hyper-fast, quick-release offense. No huddles, no long drops, no physical entanglements in the trenches if they could avoid it. The strategy was simple: run the massive, heavy Packers into the ground until their lungs burned and their legs gave out. Under the sweltering Chicago lights, the trap was sprung. Vander Kellen executed Graham's playbook with lethal precision. The fast-paced, scrappy college team outran the lumbering Packers. Every time Davis rushed the passer, the ball was already gone, leaving the Giants gasping for air. Then, with just over 3 minutes left in the game, the stadium erupted into absolute pandemonium as Vander Kellen launched a stunning 74-yard touchdown pass to his college teammate Pat Richter, who blitzed past the exhausted professional defensive backs and into the end zone. When the final gun sounded, Lombardi's worst nightmare came true. The scoreboard glowed in the Chicago night. College All-Stars 20, Green Bay Packers 17. For the college kids, it was the ultimate Cinderella story. For Vince Lombardi, it was a national disgrace. His championship, bone-crushing roster had just been bested by amateurs on primetime television. While it wasn't the first time the college All-Stars had won the matchup, with this win giving the All-Stars a total record of 9 wins, 19 losses, and 2 ties, it was by far the biggest upset of all time. The game was a massive hit, and the public tuned in the next year expecting more miracles, but they didn't realize they had just awakened a sleeping giant. The pros were done treating the Chicago Charities game as a fun, competitive exhibition, and the natural growth of the pro sport was on their side. As front offices poured money into specialized coaching, complex playbooks, and year-round conditioning, the game inevitably turned into an execution for the next 10 years. The Chicago Bears came in 1964 with a suffocating, highly evolved defense, smothering the kids 28-17. The Cleveland Browns followed suit, overwhelming the rookies 24-16. But the true horror show began when it was Vince Lombardi's turn to step back onto the field. The Packers had returned to dominance, winning 3 championships in a row between 1965 and 1967. When Lombardi stepped back onto the Soldier Field grass in 1966, he unleashed a nuclear bomb on the college roster. The Packers blitzed, battered, and completely obliterated the All-Stars in a terrifying 38-0 shutout. The professionals showed no mercy, driving the rookies into the turf long after the game was decided. The following year, Lombardi did it again, another shutout, 27-0. By the time the NFL and AFL officially merged, the talent divide was a chasm. The The bruised and battered college kids were getting absolutely dismantled by fleet-footed, specialized professional giants. Viewership plummeted. The magic was dead, but the game was still generating too much charity money for the newspapers to let it die. Hardcore fans also loved the annual ritual of kicking off the fall football season with a battle between the two ranks. It would take a massive shift in player power and an act of God to finally kill the tradition. As the 1970s rolled in, the NFL's era of blind obedience was over. The players had formed a powerful union, the NFL Players Association, NFLPA. They were no longer willing to sacrifice their bodies for a charity stunt. Alongside the union came a terrifying new, cold-blooded force: corporate insurance agencies. When an NFL team drafted a hot new prospect, signing them to a lucrative contract, the actuaries put massive insurance policies on them. From a purely mathematical standpoint, the college all-star game was a liability nightmare. Since the game featured the top seniors from the previous year, the vast majority of the players were destined to play in the NFL in the coming weeks. So taking the expensive new recruits, throwing them onto a field with different rules, with players they'd never practiced with, under a different coaching staff, was a recipe for catastrophic financial ruin. The tension over these looming calamities got a brief respite in 1974. The NFLPA went on strike, fighting a massive, league-wide labor dispute to demand better pay, freedom of movement, and safer working conditions. As a direct casualty of this massive strike, the 1974 College All-Star Game was abruptly canceled. The Miami Dolphins, the reigning champions, never took the field. The strike eventually ended, and the game awkwardly limped back into existence the following year. But the writing was on the wall. The players didn't want to be there. The coaches didn't want to be there. The insurance agencies were terrified, but the hammer that struck the final nail in the coffin wasn't a league official. It was an act of God. On July 23, 1976, the Pittsburgh Steelers, with their famed Steel Curtain, were fresh off back-to-back Super Bowl victories. They took the field against the college boys and proceeded to do what the NFL had been doing for a decade. They mercilessly pounded them. By the third quarter, the Steelers were coasting to a win with a 24-0 lead. But as the clock ticked down in the third quarter, the sky over Soldier Field turned pitch black. A torrential, apocalyptic thunderstorm ripped through the stadium. The rain fell in sheets, instantly turning the chewed-up field into a slick, dangerous mud swamp. Thunder rattled the concrete. The officials, fearing for the players' safety, suspended play. Frustrated, drenched, and fueled by the chaotic energy of the storm, tens of thousands of fans had decided they had seen enough. They stormed the field. It devolved into a full-scale riot. Drunken fans tore down the goalposts, ripped chunks of turf out of the ground, and completely overwhelmed the Chicago police. Players fled to the safety of the locker rooms as the field became a madhouse. With the stadium in shambles and the storm raging, the game was called off in utter disgrace. It was the perfect excuse. As 1977 rolled around, the Chicago Tribune prepared their usual matchup with the new Super Bowl champions, the Oakland Raiders. But Raiders head coach John Madden had vehemently despised the exhibition for years, hating the 3-week disruption to his training camp. Using the unassailable cover of the 1976 riot and the mounting panic of their insurance agencies, the NFL and its coaches finally had the leverage they needed to say no. And for the first time in 4 decades, the paper didn't have the cultural power to force them. The union reps, the owners, and the cold calculating actuaries finally agreed. The blood match was over. The All-Stars' final record: 9 wins, 31 losses, and 2 ties. Today, the worlds of college and pro football still collide once a year in a massive television spectacle, not in the mud of Soldier Field, but on the pristine, highly produced stage of the NFL Draft. If you want to know exactly how that massive multi-million-dollar spectacle was built from the ground up, check out our video on the origins of the NFL Draft right here. Or watch this other video on the history of football. Thanks for watching.